The next defense I want to look at is using object relational mappers, or ORMs as they're commonly known. Now the beauty of an ORM for software developers is it automates the persistence between entities in the database and entities in the application tier. And it makes querying them extremely simple. So for example, I've replaced the code on the page just here using Entity Framework, which is Microsoft's implementation of an ORM. And what you'll actually see on this page, if we scroll down a little bit, is that there is no more SQL syntax. In fact, the entire query now becomes just one line. So what Entity Framework has done here is it's persisted this supercars model from the database through into the app tier. And we're now using what's called a lambda syntax in order to actually query it. So this is where we're passing cylinders. Now you'll notice here that I'm not doing any specific parameterization. I'm simply asking Entity Framework to get me all the supercars with cylinders that match that parameter that's passed into this page. So let's go and reload the page with our sample injection attack, and we'll see what the underlying query looks like in SQL Profiler. So we've still got the page here from when I tested the stored procedure implementation. Let's give that a reload, jump over to SQL Profiler, and we'll open up the top result here. Now here's the query from our Entity Framework implementation. And one thing you might notice here is that it is actually quite verbose. It's a lot messier than our parameterized inline SQL or our stored procedure call. In fact, it's even got a nested SQL statement. Now there's an entirely different discussion around the efficiency of SQL that's generated by ORMs. But the really important point here is that you can still see that that v12 followed by the injection attack is passed as a parameter. So the parameter syntax is actually the same as what we saw earlier on with the inline SQL implementation. The beauty of ORMs like Entity Framework is that they automate parameterization. The developer need not know anything about parameterization, although I strongly suggest they should, and the framework automatically takes care of it for them. So using an ORM is very much falling into the pit of success. It is set up to avoid SQL injection in the first place. That's just simply the design of them. But like stored procedures, they're not entirely foolproof. You can still build up a SQL string with untrusted user data, simply concatenated into it, and then execute that against the data context of an ORM like Entity Framework. In fact, that's how I did the original bad code that we've been exploiting throughout this course. So just using ORMs alone doesn't mean you can't have an injection risk. But using ORMs in the way that they're designed to be used means that you end up with queries like this, automatic parameterization. So that's ORMs, and that wraps up the three different types of parameterization I wanted to cover. Inline SQL with parameters, stored procedures, and then of course the object relational mappers. Let's now move on and start to look at how we can actually tackle this from the database side using the principle of least privilege.